just in case for stability purposes, and then I will just, sort of continue. Right. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you taking out the time to join us. This is part of the road to 2023, connecting the dots, and having conversations that are really exploring what it means to inspire, instill, and encourage joy within the philanthropy spectrum. More importantly, I think it's really unpacking some of the nuances and challenges, and I guess maybe more importantly, the best practices of some of the amazing work that's already happening out there. So that being said, I will start with a round of introductions. So please do share, a little bit about your work, but then also more importantly, maybe what's one secret that no one in your office knows about you? Like, what's your one, superhero talent or hidden magic? We'll start with Dawn.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, whichever part of the globe you are now. I'm zooming in from Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm Dawn Makahilo. I'm the voice program manager in the Philippines. And, wow, what is this super magic power in me? Oh, probably I wanted to read more minds, more, how intricate this human brain and how it could really provide solutions to all the work that we've been doing. So, it really amazes me to know that we have so many intelligent people, but we don't find the best solutions to our issues, the global concerns that we are working on. So, yeah, thank you, Dumi.
Scott?
Hi, thank you so much. I am happy to join this candid conversation. I'm Star from Burundi. I work with Molly, and I'm really happy to be part of this conversation to share about Molly's experience around issues of philanthropy and now about the issues. I don't know if the secret, sorry. I don't know. I think that most of my things are known, so but secretly I've been thinking of having a pet, so now my secret is out. Yeah, Tina, over to you.
Thank you, Star. Tina Lubayo here from Uhai Ishri. I am based in Kajiado, Kenya. I am really excited to be here to be talking about participatory grant making, especially from my experience as Uhai. Yeah, one thing that not many people know about me is that I have been part of an acting group that we wrote plays, and yeah, we acted them out. So yeah, something interesting to add on to that.
Thank you so much for all of you sharing. I think one secret about me, maybe, yeah, I'm almost like Star also. I'm quite transparent, but I think a very open secret is that I'm a karaoke queen. So put me in any country, anywhere, let us have karaoke, and that's like a super thing. And on that note, I'm reminded of a conversation that we just had that was around intergenerational healing. And I mean, we were talking about how difficult it is to resource or even just build a case for healing, because it can't be quantified, you can't even sit and plan or prescribe, and so it can be quite difficult. But today, we're talking about one of the more prevalent, I guess, practices and I guess interventions within the context of philanthropy. And I say that because I don't think participatory grant making was always prevalent. I don't think it was always adopted, with different funding mechanisms. And so now we've seen an emergence, I guess, over the last 3 to 4 or 5 years, or correct me if I'm wrong, it might be longer, but I think, in just looking at how some grant application processes never had any means of participation and now seem to sort of be adopting this. But I think, we will definitely be unpacking various issues on participatory grant making. And I think, the real crux and where this emanates from is having had a conversation with colleagues from the Edge Funders Network. And then we had sort of, sat and said, but, surely participatory grant making isn't the ultimate solution, that it can be an entry point to shifting power. And so I am going to ask with the very first question, how do we leave no one behind in funding through participatory grant making? And so I think it's more apt to start with Tina.
Thank you, Dumi. As an activist-led fund and managed participatory fund that resources movements led by sexual and gender minorities and sex workers, for us, it is important to appreciate the need for bridging the gap between the understanding of how funding decisions are being made and the context within the work that the activists, that the movements that are being resourced by this funding is taking place. So at this time, more than ever, those with the money are making the decisions on how the resourcing of our movements is to be made. But that leaves out a very important aspect, is that those who leave the struggle and take action for the social change within their contexts, their voices aren't being heard. They're not being seen at the decision-making tables. And so it is more than ever important to work with the movements that are being resourced in a way to enable their lived realities to guide the decisions of the funding portfolios. The only way that we can even begin to catch those who fall through the cracks, because sometimes when we sit in our ivory towers as funders, we don't really appreciate the realities on the ground. And so through participatory grant making, at least we make a step towards addressing this disconnect.
Great. Thank you so much, Tina. And I guess, it makes a little bit of sense to then tap star to say, how do we ensure that no one is left behind? I think Tina already alluded to it in recognizing lived experiences and the fact that, even coming out, I don't want to say coming out of, because, we're still amidst the pandemic. The reality is that there's so many other challenges that are happening now today. So how do we ensure that no one is left behind, especially when we're even looking at, new activists, emerging activists, unregistered organizations. And I guess maybe, even in your region, it would be good to add, some context, because there've been quite a few coups d'etats in the last 3 years. Star.
Yeah, thank you. I think I really agree with Tina, because normally when you're thinking of participatory grant making mechanism, you're really looking at how do you ensure that the community at the table is deciding and really pushing for enough resources going where they need to be. And most of the time where they have to be might be different of what one person might be thinking within the PGM. And it becomes more of a question of collective voices, deciding collectively where is it that we should be really going to put the funding. So there is a certain level of, common and shared ground, and also internal accountability mechanism in ensuring that, hey, at the end of the day, we are 5, 4, 10 people or 13 people. let's make sure that all our diversity is also transpiring in how funding are dispersed.
So I think, Star, just to unpack a little bit further, and I think in really saying what happens if someone is not registered, right? And you mentioned accountability. What happens when someone doesn't have a registered organization, or in the context of your region where it's amidst a crisis, like a constitutional crisis. How can we say that accountability is really there when maybe some of the members who represent communities would have certain elements of privilege? Maybe they've got unrestricted funding, or maybe they're not dealing with the same kind of contextual issues that are happening there. So I think the question is, for the other 100 that is not part of that 10 or 13 people who are able to contribute towards that decision making, what do you think is a way to ensure that some of those perspectives would be included when those 13 or 10 activists are deciding?
So now, one key aspect around PGM, and it comes from my experience, from what I have seen, is that the process of deciding who gets to be on the table is most of the time in the hands of the community. Whoever will be sitting to decide and really make the decision on the table will be coming from the community, and they will be chosen by the community. Now, there are other aspects, very important aspects around, which is for me some kind of, I would rank them within the administrative part. Being registered or not doesn't mean that one doesn't have a room for contribution to advancement of protection and especially for marginalized communities. And I think that this is the moment when you, as Tina said, one brings the experience of their own community on the table. And it becomes a very important aspect about, coming from the community, not being or speaking on behalf of the field, because we are the field. And at the end of the day, making sure that at the end of the day, here I'm talking about after you have came up to know how much money is available and how valuable work proposed by XYZ organizations will be, concurrently contributing to the, shared goal. It becomes a question of rationalizing. Are we putting everyone on the table? Most of the time we're thinking about, registered or not registered. I mean, what about organizations working or based in slums, or that are proposing work in slums? Or what about those organizations working or doing work in urban area or rural area? What about some affirmative aspect of ensuring that historically marginalized communities in our own communities are also having some seat and also possibility of contributing to what movements will be coming about? I think those are the key aspects I like to look at, and where I have been really appreciating on how different organizations and funders are now really pressing, putting a really, highlight and ensuring that those key aspects are on the table. Thank you.
And Dawn, how do you ensure that no one is left behind through participatory grant making?
Okay, I'm learning so much from Star and Tina, so thank you for inviting us here from Voice. So basically, I think I'll bring in the perspective of Voice. So I'll share briefly what is Voice for Tina and Star, and also to our audience. So Voice is a 6-year-old innovative grant facility that supports rights holders and groups facing marginalization or discrimination in their efforts to achieve their freedom and enjoy their rights. So we are working in 10 countries in Africa and Asia, and we are funded by the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So before I jump into the how, I always go into the question of who, for me to really understand and come up to the how. So I start with answering first who, or looking at who is left behind and why. So with this, it could shape our house and our focus, our responses, and our framework. So we at Voice prioritizes 5 marginalized groups, namely women facing exploitation and violence, indigenous peoples and ethnic minorities, PWDs, LGBTQIA, and vulnerable youth and elderly. So we also put so much value on intersectional justice, to sectoral discussions, to shifting the power, top-down decision maker. I think also, which also resonates to what Star has mentioned, that again, this is not a question of who are registered or not, because these are mostly where we are working at Voice in different countries. We are focusing on informal organizations in the countrysides, those who have been really rich, not really reached by the funds, no. So I'd like, so how we do that? We ensure that we don't do so much work on the application processes. So say, for example, using the colonized language. The Philippines has great mastery of English language, but at the same time, if we're looking or if we are targeting those who are in the countrysides, most of these have regional languages, and most of them cannot really write in English. So we also open the application to using their regional languages. And for PWDs, we also accept audio recording of applications to accommodate them. We also entertain different platforms as always sessions for them to know what are we looking for, what project we are looking or what our focus is in. Those are the ways that we want to be more inclusive by really looking at those areas. But at the same time, of course, we have our own biases in terms of those organizations or rights holders groups that they're working with. We are, as I mentioned, we're only like a 6-year-old organization. So basically, the journey of learning to dive deeper is, still on the shallow. But at the same time, we are so glad to be part of this bigger space to link and learn, to explore meaningful and engagement PGM ways, and deconstructing power imbalances. So probably I'll stop here, doing.
Thank you, Dawn. And I think I'm really inclined to then literally ask you all just to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to ask you all, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And literally just tell me what's the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about participatory grant making. And I will it'll either be a short phrase or it'll be a word. So maybe let me start with Star. And the phrase that I'm going to present to you is gatekeeping. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Gatekeeping. So in my experience here, I'm talking about an experience of a person who has been part of different PGM teams, and who can share with you how really difficult gatekeeping can happen, at least in those spaces where I was with. Because there was this sense of belonging that we are, that has to be, cultivated when you want to really set up a successful PGM mechanism. But again, there is that one space, that one experience that once happened around gatekeeping. But again, it's the role of the moderator, whoever is moderating or whoever is facilitating the work of the PGM, to ensure that those kind of gatekeeping tendencies are really mitigated. How? It depends. It depends on what people do really think about collective organizing, because at the end of the day, it's all about that. And again, most of the time, some of the key aspects that enable that gatekeeping is maybe because one may be looking at bringing their own experience to just say that it should be the one that should be emulated. And again, I'm really not of the idea, because as much as we're touting diversity, respect of diversity, inclusion, we should also be touting this kind of diversities in terms of strategies, in terms of ensuring that there is enough in the ecosystem that, it's a buffet. And a buffet will be, accommodating for every and each of the guests. Again, it depends. But again, in my experience, dealing with gatekeeping is really about, at the end of the day, ensuring that we maintain a focus on the collective and shared goal.
Thank you so much, Star. And I think what you mentioned is really important, because it is about the convener, right? It's about the people who bring together all these different community interests, aspirations, and needs. And I think, something that you're also mentioning is that there is a need to accommodate everyone. A buffet, you can have multiple plates. A buffet means that, folks who've got dietary needs can be accommodated. And I think in the context of grant making, one can sit there and say, oh my goodness, the amount of money that's available is small, or even just the possible options that are there are very small. And so I think, you bring in a very great element and analogy around, participatory grant making, and especially, sort of illuminating or elucidating how it can be accommodating, enabling for all communities. And more importantly, just that the fact that when you're going to focus on gatekeeping or challenging gatekeeping, you're immediately then opening it up, right? And I think that really then, sort of brings into, another phrase that I want to ask. I will then ask Tina, what's the first thing that comes to mind in relation to participatory grant making when I say, oh my goodness, the word left. Okay, the word left. Oh my God. Oh man, and it was so amazing. I think it was, yeah. Okay, so let me just make up another one. Harmful gender norms.
Sorry, Dumi, I lost you for a bit. Did you say harmful practices?
Harmful gender norms.
Harmful gender norms. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is an appreciation and an application of what could be deemed as an intersectional approach to grant making, because we need also to have the way we talk about gender, for example, as funders, needs to also be expanded. It needs to also take into account those other gender identities that would not necessarily form within that little box of what is considered to be normal gender norms or gender identities, if you may. And also the importance of intersectionality as a way of, as Star has alluded to, bringing all the voices to the table, to the decision-making table, and have their lived experiences valued as the basis of how the decisions on how the money should move, should be made. And yeah, so for me, also thinking, taking this further and actually throwing it back to the feminist organizations, to the human rights organizations, to the mainstream women's rights organizations, that gender need not be this rigid concept, because therein lies the facilitation of the historical injustices to anybody who does not fall within what is considered to be normal as far as gender is concerned. So how do you as a funder come up with funding programs that actually are delivered in a way that does not continue causing that harm that, has been perpetuated towards historically marginalized gender identity communities, but also taking into account how not also to aggravate avoidable social, economic, demographic, or geographical differences, within of the context within which LGBTIQ plus and sex worker movements and activists actually operate in.
Great, thank you so much, Tina. And I think, it also then reminds me that not all safe spaces are actually safe spaces. And I think it's important to sort of recognize that and acknowledge it and really unpack how best that everyone can be able to thrive in their diversity, even if it's beyond binaries. John, so I think you already alluded to a lot to language. And I think that was really quite critical. I think the phrase that I will present to you is South to South solidarity.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I think it speaks largely to the volume of decolonization. I think it's always been associated with the term north to north, global to global to south, north to south, and then my favorite of all is south to south. But I think it's a very good element of looking at or doing an assessment of the kind of participatory grant making we're looking at in terms of that. We should always, I think, I'd like to add to what have been said in terms of looking at the spaces that we are into. I think it also means it's who holds the power in those spaces. Are those people from the South, or are those different people? Or is it a young Black girl, young Black queer person who holds the power but eloquently speaks in a colonized language? Those stuff, I think we have seen it all. But at the same time, but we should always focus on how to dismantle the system that prevents us from being involved in the conversation, and how we are identifying the intersectionality into the systems, and how we are looking at the worldview. In addition to that, I have also experienced that in some organizations, they're really picky who will be involved into the conversations, even if they target is a south to south engagement or participatory grant making. But bottom line, at the same time, I'm also like to emphasize also that these spaces is not only limited to us. Even in our circles, even our own networks, there are some who would, engage to our own spaces, suddenly jumping into these spaces, like, we're young people, probably queer people, but then, we know more about you. You're just only young people, or sort of like those. But at the same time, while also addressing that one, this the way I'm looking at it, this is also a happy problem. Why? Because it means that the spaces is very empowering or very enticing to everyone. But we should also have a reflection on who should, on a deeper part, who are the advantages, and who are most involved here in the discussion, or who are not into the discussion. These are the affected communities that far outweighing any obstacles that we may miss, and may focus on different parts. So see, for example, instead of focusing to this happy problem, again, why not bring focus to the people we wanted to work on or help with? So I always want to add as well that we it brings to the table these kind of marginalized sectors and perspectives that are really ignored in decision making. It's not only making them having the microphone and that's it, but we are, I think, being part of the PDM, we are in the position to acknowledge, also confront and embrace these realities and challenges. At the same time, what do we do with it, right? bottom line is that we need to do the shifting. We need to rebalance the sharing of power with the affected communities and constituencies. Because at the end of the day, gatekeeping, harmful gender norms, and even south to south, maybe something that could be of greater benefit if we could only put focus again to where we should be working on, not on the division that may cause with this different differences, basically. May it be political ideologies, may it be focus, may it be whatsoever that may confront us along the way.
Thank you, Dawn. And I think, it's important. You brought some elements that are really quite critical in terms of acknowledging that even when there is representation, that they can be harmful ways that are, that we assimilate to. And, just reading Tina's comment as well in terms of norms and what is prevalent, in terms of what is acceptable, that might be something that's really more in terms of proximity to the donor as opposed to the communities. And I think that brings me to the question really around decolonization. And I will start with, the Francophone experience, with you, Star, in terms of just sort of how can we really decolonize? Is participatory grant making one way of decolonizing, but also acknowledging that decolonizing is such a huge and vast field, from language to the demarcation of borders, framing and issues, issues of skin color and so forth. And so the question really is, how then, in this context of participatory grant making, can we really decolonize? So we know that there might be some folks who have adopted participatory grant making and they might have problematic ways, or we know that, there's a certain element of gatekeeping. In spite of all of these elements, how do we decolonize to make sure that, the kind of activism and movement building that happens is in such a way that is really gender, climate, queer, just as possible? Star?
I think this is really quite an assumption to think that through PGM, decolonization would be some straightforward conversation and something we end up with. And here I want really us to also acknowledge the importance of learning, growing, and also understand that there are different, group development theories applicable to this whole process of PGM. Decolonization, again, is a really broad space. It's a really broad aspect about when you're thinking of, the philanthropic sector. Because when, how we are defining philanthropy is not really how philanthropy is in our own homes. We all have that one, rich uncle or rich auntie who will always dedicate some of their funding to ensuring that, you are able to go to school, or you are able to pay your medical bill. And even when you don't have them, you're gonna, build different mechanism, community mechanism of ensuring that funding can be, utilized to, for the, to assist the needs of whoever is part of any structure or any community. All along these processes, or all along these years, communities in Kenya, for instance, have come up with this mchanga, which is like a community-led way of doing philanthropy, assisting each other. So now, when it comes to this kind of different aspect we're thinking about or we're looking at, most of the time it's gonna be funding that comes from, one of those Western capital that comes with a lot of colonial baggage. We are living in countries that have a lot of, that's still under, or scrambling under a lot of colonial law, or laws that were left with the at the time of the colonial of the colonization as well. When you're looking at it and you'll be like, oh yeah, there are all these laws around morality. Even our faith, we are defining it based on something we inherited from colonization. And I think that here there is a lot of ideologies that are mixing, and there is a room for learning and also drawing a path on what decolonization can mean. So again, there are different aspects around ensuring that, for instance, when it's time to do proposal writing, you can be able to do it in your own language. This is something that Dawn has shared here, which is really important as we're thinking of successful PGM processes. But then there is also this aspect of, I would rank it mostly under cultural exchange, understanding what are the different cultural aspects that are at play in the room or within the movement we're thinking about. You alluded to the Francophone experience, but again, I think that there is a lot of also recognition that we as individuals, we are not immune to whatever discourse that's happening in the country or in the region around any decolonization discourse that's happening. We are looking at decolonizing how we do advocacy. We are looking also or talking or exploring how we are decolonizing even aspects of ensuring that our mere existence, which is a threat most of the time, is really aligning with our kind of environment where we are evolving in. So I think, and this is also what, this is the different, this is the stage of learning where I am at, that PGM offers like a room for learning, mostly like peer learning. And again, having a successful PGM, most of the time, it should be something that will come the moment there is cohesion among the members of the team. The moment people within the team think and have some, diverse sensibility around the issues of norming, but also understanding that at the end of the day, we have to accommodate different ideologies in making sure that we are advancing, looking at these different aspects of, how do you say, it's mostly like adaptability, adapting to each context. So this is what I can, contribute to this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Star. I mean, the breadth and depth of decolonization is obviously very vast. And I'm curious, Tina, if there have been any lessons learned or insights in the context of decolonization that you think, are quite evident through participatory grant making, or that, even at how you've practiced.
Yes. I like what Star is sharing about it being a process of learning. Decolonization is not something that starts and stops at a particular time. It's a journey, and it takes very many forms. So what comes to mind, in addition to what has already been shared, is for us, accountability is a two-way relationship. So it's not enough that the funders of UHAI as a participatory fund demand us to be accountable on certain things. Our movements, the movements that UHAI serves, the movements that UHAI resources in all 7 Eastern African countries, demand accountability from us as the Secretariat, as that body that is bringing together the money into one pot, and so that the activists that have been tasked with the obligation of ensuring that this money is moving and is being distributed in a way that speaks to the needs of all the movements in our region of support, that is something that we in all our engagements with our funders, it's something we speak on very explicitly and to make them understand. So when we challenge them, for example, on how they are supporting our movements to respond to safety and security crisis within the region, it's actually just bringing them to appreciate that, for one, we are still living the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. 3 years down the line, for example, everything seems to have gone back to normal, but our communities are still bearing the brunt of the abandonment by their governments as far as healthcare is concerned. This is why it's more important now than ever to keep on resourcing community-based healthcare services, for example. The importance of psychosocial support. Why is mental well-being and well-being at the core, at the center of what we do? And Uhai also shares our understanding of rest as a political act, not because we want to say that when we rest, there's nothing we are doing. No, we have done so much, and there's so much to be appreciated about the labor that the activists who drive our movements have put in, both in safeguarding the gains and also just ensuring the survival of the communities that they come from and the communities that they support throughout the various crises that we have seen. So decolonization, collective healing and self-care, individual self-care as part of decolonizing the narrative that as an activist, all you have to do is keep on fighting. No. How do you take a pose to ensure that you survive as an activist in order to ensure that to ensure the sustainability of your community and the movements that you drive? So for me, it's really where we are right now. It's actually just keeping on learning from the movements that we serve, that we resource, and also just to know that the way in which a participatory grant making can make sense is if all the time the lived realities, the work by the activists is at the center of everything that we do, and understand as funders that our role is more facilitative than anything, but to ensure that we are resourcing our movements like we want them to win, like we are actually cognizant of the very dynamic and often hostile situations within which they have to operate. So now is not the time to double back on the flexible funding portfolios that, so many of us adopted as funders during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now is the time to say, this is what we have learned from all that, and this is how we are putting it into practice, so as to make sure that that disconnect between the funding decisions and the context within the work, within which the work happens, is growing narrower and narrower. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. I think, that really sort of illuminated so many elements, and it's important, and it's something that definitely needs to be part of this journey towards January 2023. I'm going to bring you in, Dawn, and I think, in just one part where Tina was speaking about context, and I'm trying to figure out, being in the Philippines and with the political situation in the Philippines and having to reconcile that with a lot of the issues that are happening in multiple countries where Voice operates. I'm just wondering, are there avenues for decolonization through participatory grant making or outside of it?
Okay, thanks for that, Dumi. So it's very interesting times to be in the Philippines right now. So the son of the dictator is back in power, and barely few months in the office, and we still have 5 more years. So basically, in general sense, to give you an overview of what's happening now in the Philippines, is that the shrinking civic spaces is growing and grower. And as Civicus puts it into paper in the report, it says we're now obstructed, from repressive to obstructive. So you could imagine how things are now in the Philippines. Well, of course, the way I'm seeing it, we always learn. It's a process of learning and unlearning. To dance alone or to dance as a collective. So I think the activists, the human rights defenders, and also funders, or also parts of the PGM, are also looking at far-sighted, views as well. So we have so many trajectories as well on how to create more platforms to openly share our learnings, our challenges, and how to come up together and set aside our political differences, but basically putting on the added value. Now, the common enemy is that how do we make democracy work at its finest? How could we enjoy our freedom, our rights, when in fact, overall, all of us are affected? It's not only, we cannot set aside gender issues to climate justice, to inflation, to political rights. I think we need to come up together, really, reassert our voices into the table, and at the same time, look at our inner selves, um, again, not only as an individual, but as a collective. We have been doing so much work already, but at the same time, is that what is the added value of us going together? Um, this is where I also aligned it to the PDM. I think it has been a practice in the country, but at the same time, things have been different since then. Since the first dictator, the father, has been around, and up to now, the son is back in power. It's evolving. It's becoming, as I describe as well, the democratic spaces, the civic spaces in the country is also shrinking. um the young people, where are the young people who are in the table? These are the old ones. So these also intergenerational gaps that we're trying to look at. And I think I've been emphasizing as well that we as young people are seen as someone, fun and hippie. You just like to have this one, that's it. But they miss the point that, being fun and hippie is one way to make the dance in the revolution more lively, more brilliant, more fun in many many aspects. Um, but at the same time, if I'm looking at that kind of activism of the PGM right now, if we're missing some key areas in there, and we would focus on our own, and not looking at intersectional justice, I think we will be in limbo. How do I say that? Because again, things are interconnected: land, water, climate justice, people, energy, everything. So if we keep pushing for our own sectoral interests, but not as a collective call to action, I don't know where we'll be. So I think also with PGM, we have different perspective. We have different people on board. Some are just there to just observe. Some are just there to really invade the space. But at the same time, we are also learning that this is not an issue of gatekeeping. This is sharing resources. This is changing the mindset. This is looking at the shared values that we have all. When we, in fact, we are also fighting for a common enemy. But the bottom line is that I think it needs a deeper reflection for all of us. There are so many ways that that people are looking into, but I think if one plan A would fail, I think series of PGMs will keep growing as a mushroom. But at the same time, while it is something not possible, and I think it's been growing rapidly globally, and if we're not learning from each other, and if we keep on keeping the learning from ourselves, the challenges and the successes, so I don't really get it why people are just like that. Why are we not sharing to the world our publications, our learnings as funders, or how we are able to convince our own funders, to really look at the context where they are not operating. Because like in the Philippines, I'm pretty guilty that at some point I wasn't able to really put extra focus on the issues of climate justice. Well, of course, we have some projects that really deal on it, but not really super like 100% climate justice, when in fact the Philippines is one of the countries affected by the climate crisis. What else? Say for example, the young people voices on the table. We don't find them. At the same time, regional collaborations among other stuff. We were really pushing for that, and it's a good thing that Irene pointed that one. Very brave, to really share what we wanted to our funders. But at the same time, reality sucks. We need to, at some point, we need to weave things together. The programming and building synergies. We meet halfway. I know, as I've mentioned, it's the work is not yet done, but a continuous process and a learning. So I think I'll just end in there, but probably PGM is exactly a process of learning, a continuous journey, and I'm excited where we're heading. Thank you,
Thank
Dumi.
you so much, Dawn. Thank you. I mean, I like all three of you are really quite amazing. And I think, a lot of insights. In fact, some of the questions that should have been asked were already answered automatically in the discussion. And I think, I will ask Irene to come in based on maybe, what you've heard, and also just the weekly conversations we've had. Irene is part of the co-conveners of the Shift the Power UK Funders Collective. And I hope maybe you would be able to sort of, based on these responses and maybe, some additional insights, just to say, if participatory grant making really is an entry point to shifting power, then what is the end point if there is one? Irene?
Sorry, I've just unmuted myself. So hi, everyone. A pleasure to be with you. Dumi, Star, and the rest of the team this afternoon. As to the question, Dumi, it's a big one, but if we can envisage a participatory grant making as an entry point to shift some of the power around some of the basics, we could say, such as greater ownership over the funds, greater ownership and definition of what the needs are. So if we can shift from funders and philanthropists telling us, this is our strategy, we will be supporting X, Y, and Z initiatives over the next 3 years, would you like to apply? We could shift to a much more simple entry point, which is, what are your needs? What are you working on? Where can we help? How can we be of help? I think even the language in the first engagement are critical in that entry point. So focusing on what are your needs, what are your priorities, and also equally important is, how do you see success? Like, the success quite often is also measured and defined by funders. But in a participatory context, one would envisage and hope that the key question there would be, well, what do you consider success look like? And you give us the indicators that will, in your context, which is very specific and very idiosyncratic in some cases, very culturally specific. So you have to take success in those contexts, not in a globally set of standards. I think the midpoint is really truly setting that local agenda and respecting the local agenda, recognizing also that needs change in these highly volatile and changing contexts. Many of you today have mentioned how, like in the case of the Philippines with Voice, there's a shrinking space, there's been a political shift. This is very typical and common, and therefore that recognition in participatory grant making that what you set out to do and agreed upon and built trust around may not be feasible in a highly volatile, changing and shrinking social space. So I think participatory grant making really needs to continue to work on having a very flexible toolbox, very adaptable toolbox that does anticipate beforehand as part of the realities that, you know, closing civil space that can be accompanied by very restrictive laws on the functioning of activists, the right to protest, the right for advocacy, the right to be heard. These rights that are taken away are very often have impacts on the very governance of organizations and activists and movements, because very restrictive laws are put into place. So I think if we're looking very strategically at what an endgame might look like, it is having that recognition built into the early conversations right from the start, that you may be in a situation as a funder or a philanthropist of helping an organization or a movement, alliance, and a federation, a savings and loans group at a community level to survive through very difficult times. And you may have to put some of your resources into looking how you can shift your funding in very creative ways so that you will be there, not just in the good times, but in the most difficult times. And I think if there is an end game, I'm not sure, Dumi, if there's such a thing as an end game, but I think that one of the flags of an end game has to be that if you're coming in as a funder or philanthropist, it's not just for 3 years. It's not just to dabble and see what you might be able to shift. But if you really want to have survival, thriving and growth, then you really should have in your mind visualized strong, resilient organizations that are well capitalized, that have the rights to own their own assets, and that your funding isn't just to execute projects or short-term pilots or prove that you can improve the lives of a few 100,000 people, but you really want to leave behind, if you leave, those organizations that will be there long after you've actually been a companion to them in the journey for leaving no one behind.
Thank you so much, Irene. I think, yeah, technology wanted to be jealous for a moment there. Thank you for bringing in some of those elements. And I think, you know, the biggest takeaway for me is really, you know, the capital, right? Social, economic asset. And I think that's important because that's really quite key to deploying and exercising power, to be honest. And I think it's really important for us to start having those kinds of conversations around capital investments and what that looks like, because it's a clear determinant of power. And I think, you know, that then brings me to a question really of why we're gathering and coming together is how do we bring joy in spite of knowing, you know, all the challenges that, you know, a political situation from a load shedding perspective, but also having, you know, touched away harmful normative price of working. And I guess more importantly, you know, like Tina's saying, maybe that endpoint is the win, right? So what does that win look like? And I think, you know, I'm going to interpret that in the context of joy. How do we bring joy through participatory grant making so that we can start having conversations around decolonization, around asset building and capital endowments, so to speak. How can we really do that in a way that is meaningful, impactful, and I guess more importantly, transformative, but really so that all communities can thrive. And let's start with you, Star. Star, how do we bring joy in the context of this conversation?
More money. No. I mean, I think that the sole concept of several activists sitting on a table and deciding where funding should be going should be something we should be also happy about, because not long ago, this is not what used to be the practice coming from different donors. Now, there are different bold activists also who are for the sustainable movement, but also organization. And here, this kind of organization recognize that there is an aspect of sustainability, but also committing to the cause, which comes with understanding that we are not winning tomorrow, even if we win. Tomorrow, we have to make sure that we are keeping it. And safeguarding wins means also bringing I'm back. Sorry. Load sheddings, these also are some of the aspects of, working from a, working from a place where, there are energy problems. So, I was sharing that to sustain the work that we do, there is a need to ensure that there is this aspect of already starting thinking of our sustainability and its sustainability. It's really interesting that some of the PGM has really started looking at utilizing that kind of specific power to really ensure and encourage this aspect of, for instance, providing general support funding. I'm speaking like on the experience of Ohio, for instance, which has different layers of funding to ensure that not only the funding is multi-year, but also to ensure that this funding can sometimes cover only core support. And these, I think, will be and have to be some of the growing aspect. And for me, on my side, it really brings joy because, whenever I would go for a PGM, I will know that not only my organization or the work that we do will be funding today, but also it will be funding also next year. And that's really powerful and it brings joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Star, even though I am definitely going to have to be rewatching this. Load shedding is not a friend for the connectivity. So I will then turn to Dawn. How can we bring joy in the context of all of this, mess, call it, if you will, best practices through participatory grant making?
So wow, I hope I have all the answers now. But at the same time, voice in general and me as part of the Fanters group or kind of spaces like this, I'm very new, that's for sure. I'm still navigating and exploring ways, diving deeper, definitely learning and learning. But probably what would make it a joyful place for all of us is, I think, again, we co-design, we co-learn, we widen the horizons together, share best practices, widen the frames to shift the power, and not to gatekeeping. Let's be part of an overall dancing that makes the revolution or the resistance good, and may it be bad, and in between, but at the same time make it the best performances of our lives. How do we do that? Welcome everyone. Be inclusive as possible. Open the doors to everyone. Open the opportunity to everyone. Um, Definitely. I think we would be creating a fantastic journey and a world if that would be the scenario. So thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dawn. And in closing, Tina, how do we bring joy in this entire river? And I'm going to call it, and in this ocean.
It's a vast ocean indeed. But I would actually build onto something that Star had started by saying. We need money, but not just any money. We need good money. What do we mean by good money? We need good money that enables organizations as institutions, and also the individual activists who are, working within those organizations to grow. Good money that will enable our activists to actually focus on the work and not on meeting the conditions of the grant, for example. So we need good money that is not extractive, good money that is actually funding us like, it wants us to win, because we are dealing in we are operating in very dynamic contexts where things change from one day to another. And with the right resources, we can be, better equipped to keep on pushing back, because that is what is needed if we are going to safeguard, all the work, all the gains that our movements have achieved in our regions, and also to keep on just pushing back against the anti-rights and the anti-gender movements that are just, growing with tremendous momentum. So yes, for me, the joy would be having resources that would actually enable us to start seeing the shifts that we need to see from a social, cultural perspective, and especially that enables us as activists and as funders, funding indigenous funds, to keep on, growing that political thought that also enables us to keep on pushing back against the political and economic insubordination that our historically marginalized communities have been subjected to.
Thank you so much, Tina. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Star. I mean, y'all have been really, really amazing. Thanks, Irene, for your intervention. It has been an amazing conversation, and I think this is one of the best ways to sort of continue weaving in all these different elements across the philanthropy ecosystem. And hopefully it can plant some of those seeds that are needed to pollinate, to make such a beautiful garden that everyone can be able to thrive, and that we don't possibly have Trump for president in the US or any other authoritarian regime in future. So that being said, thank you so much. May you have a lovely, lovely, lovely Thursday. It has been amazing, and I'm really, really appreciative of your time.